Greetings and welcome to SC Thrive's Mental Health Matters Forum. We appreciate you being here today. We want to remind you that we have a forum every second and fourth Thursday of each month at 11:30 a.m. We cover a different subject at each forum. Our subject today is Youth Mental Health Matters. We'd like to tell you about SC Thrive. Our mission is to lead South Carolinians to stability by providing innovative and efficient access to quality of life resources. Again, our subject today is Youth Mental Health Matters.
Something scary happens. If we as adults don't talk to them about it, a child may overestimate what is wrong or misunderstand an adult's silence. Myself, 6'5", I sometimes end up in turtle mode and I get quiet. And that's alarming for my kids because they don't know if it's something they did or maybe it's because I had a bad day at work or something else is going on in my life. So it's important for us to let them know. Instead of trying to shield our children from dangers, violence, or tragedies around us, we should talk to our kids about what's happening. So sometimes it's important for us to bring up a difficult topic. You know, the conversation may never be easy, but taking a proactive stance, discussing difficult events in an age-appropriate language can help our children feel safer and more secure. Over time, you know, we notice when there's good times to talk to our kids. It may be at bedtime, it may be before dinner, or it may be in the car. And when we do talk to them, we need to be fully available to them and to listen to them. You know, when we as parents tackle difficult conversations, they let our children know that we are available and supportive. Some of the greatest times and some of the greatest conversations with my kids have occurred in the car when we're driving down the road. And they will just break the silence and start talking. And it has just made all the difference. You know, when you're trying to think about what you're going to say to your child, it's okay to practice. It's okay to look in the mirror. We have talked in the last forums, we've talked about having that go-to person. And you know, for me to be able to call my friend and say, so let me tell you what I'm going through. And what do you think? And they may say, well, you know, I've had that problem or I had that situation and this is how I dealt with it. The other thing is we want to get with our spouse. Some of the greatest successes that I've had with my children is when I'm able to see my wife and I'm able to take cues from her, just her facial expressions, to know whether our discussion with the kids might be going the right way or the wrong way. We need to find a quiet moment, turn the TV off. We need to find out what our kids know. Ask a simple question of, hey, what have you heard about this? And then listen, and listen some more. We need to share our feelings with our kids. We need to speak from the heart. And they know when we're being transparent or not. It's okay for us to let our guard down. Our kids get a chance to see us even though we're upset. We can pull ourselves together and continue on. That helps them learn how to be resilient. Parents hear it often, be a role model. You know, this applies to emotions too. Our kids are like modeling clay, and they're going to often model what we model. Please tell the truth. Lay out the facts so they can understand it. You don't need to give graphic details and statistics, but try to explain things in simple terms. Sometimes the answer to the question is, I don't know. Learn to be okay with saying, I don't know. The question may come up, why did the bad people do this? And saying, I don't know at the time fits. The biggest thing, remember our key words from our other forums. recovery, and hope. And another word now is reassurance. Make sure at the end of the conversation that we reassure our kids that we're there for them and we're going to take care of them and we're going to watch out for them, no matter what their age. You know, as adults, we sometimes feel bored and we want to change because the same things happen over and over again. Kids love routine. They beg for repetition. They may ask you to read that book again. But you know, them wanting to hear that book again is no different than us watching the same movie over again, even though it may be at the chagrin of my wife. Haven't we seen this movie before? Repetition in the form of routines has many benefits for children. Routines can help children feel safe. Routines can also help children to develop independence. Routines and a schedule can provide a sense of certainty in an otherwise uncertain time like right now. When children know what to expect, they're better able to cope with it. The sense of predictability can decrease anxiety and help children navigate challenging situations. I want to bring in Eva, and some of you may have taken advantage of our chat. You can chat with us. And Eva, are there any discussion points that are up at this time?
Yes, we have an individual named Stephanie. She loves the idea that it's okay with sharing our feelings with our children as long as they're positive, and it builds into them that we're human too.
I had that conversation with a friend of mine the other day that I wish I had been able to have more intimate conversations with my dad. But his age, that's just not something they did. And it's really because I didn't do it with my dad, I really didn't do it with my kids. And it's a great thing for us to start. This next picture is so incredible. Being a paramedic, we spend a lot of time in the initial minutes of a call looking at the people's faces and looking at the scene. It can tell us so much. And when you look at this child, all they want is for you to fill their cup. And just like the child needs their cup filled, so do we. Every day we need our love cup. That can be basic physical needs, love and affection, security, attention, play, doing something that they love, even though it may not be something we want to do at the moment. Most children get a little nervous when their cup gets near empty. When I was driving down the road today, I thought a lot about this, and I think about how nervous all of us get when that fuel light comes on. And we may be a little further from a gas station than what we are. And that's like our cup. They have to be filled, and sometimes it's not the most convenient time. Their cup can be emptied by stress and strain, rejection by peers or family, loneliness and isolation, yelling and punishment, failing, fatigue, and having to do things they hate to do. Sounds a lot like us. Uncooperative behavior is often a communication of an unmet need for a connection. When we don't meet that need of our children, we survive, but they don't thrive. Human beings have an incredible ability to adapt to most living conditions that allow us to survive. However, we do not thrive when we have to adapt to living conditions that don't meet our biological and our emotional needs. When a person's cup isn't filled, they can attempt to steal from other people's cups. Sound familiar? They may act out a need to refill, or they may have to feel like they have to fight for every time that they need their cup refilled. Anxiety is a big deal in your life and in my life. And anxiety in children and teens presents itself in many different ways. It's usually been present for a long time. It's sort of like illness. Illness can be there for a while till it finally shows itself. And that's the same thing with anxiety and fear. They can be problematic. It's important to be aware and do a regular check-in. When my cell phone lights up with my kids' names on it, it's absolutely priceless. It is so huge for me to be able to know that my kids reaching out to me that day. And if I don't hear from them by the end of the day, I reach out with them. You know, as a parent, as a teacher, as a caring adult, you have to trust your intuition to know, hey, something's different. Or, hey, I haven't heard from my child, or I just need to maybe walk down the hall and say, what's up? You know, the kids, sometimes things trick them into believing that things are safe when they're actually dangerous. Some kids need to, unfortunately, they explore the possibility that there may be more going on. And one thing that we never need to stop doing is being that advocate for our kids. Even in the later years of their life, we need to be an advocate so your child and mine feel safe and supported. We're going to talk about self-regulation. It's an important tool. Children develop it throughout their life for mental health, sort of like a mental health toolbox, like one of our forms. You know, the way that self-regulation requires learning, it helps us recognize and respond to stress in many different facets, positive as well as negative, hidden as well as overt, and minor as well as traumatic or sometimes toxic. There's 5 components that we want to talk about. One is biological, emotional, cognitive, social, and pro-social. It's particularly important in the context of making healthy choices when we have a strong desire to do the opposite. Sometimes life is challenging, devastating, and you know, life's just unfair. Teaching kids to see these things early in their life can help them throughout the rest of their life. It can help them with their self-regulation lens and make them more aware of what their feelings are and what may stress them out. Once aware, it helps them recognize and ask for the support they need to make things better. So I have to admit that I like to dress up. My son, he had surgery one time, and when he came out of surgery and he had the anesthesia on board, he said, "I'm Superman, Dad." I said, "Okay." You know, the most important thing we as parents and caring adults can do is to help our children build resilience. And that's through modeling resilience in our lives. Resilience is the ability to bounce back after a disappointment, failure, or a difficulty. It's a learned skill that can be developed and strengthened at any age. Change often can be scary for children and teens, just like us. We need to help our children see that change is an essential part of life. Tough times are often the times when children learn the most about themselves. Help your children take a look at whatever they're facing and let them know what they're made of. Help them take a look at the situation in a bigger context and keep a long-term perspective. Help them see that there's a future beyond what's going on right now and that the future can be good. Being optimistic and having a positive outlook enables your children to see the good things in life and to keep going even in the hardest times. Optimism wasn't something that came easy to me, and it may not be something that has come easy to you, but we can help our kids through it. Taking time with our kids, breaking up the routine can also be helpful. What an awesome picture this is. Right now, we can go down to the store and we can plant a plant. And we can show a lot of things through the growth of that plant. Sometimes we can include resilience because there may be a downpour and that plant may have to come back from that. Children may feel helpless and they need helpers. Mr. Rogers said, when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. We can always find helpers. When we're going around, there's things that we can bring our kids in and they can help do things that we're doing. For instance, we may be a volunteer. We may be a volunteer at a food bank. The kids may be able to go with us. It may be a project that they can take on where they can actually gather food from neighbors and take it with them the next time you go and volunteer at the food bank. It may be something like writing a note to a senior that's going through a tough time. Or it may be just being in the neighborhood and walking around and saying hello to people. Everything that we do can help establish a sense of self-worth and purpose. Eva, have there been any more comments that have come out?
Yes, George. Give me 1 second. Um, Stephanie said that her family prays as a family, creates an environment for children to share feelings. Raquel said, we have been spending a lot of time outside in the yard, enjoying our bikes, praying, eating together. It's been very relaxing. We enjoy being outside more.
It's an incredible environment right now just to take it in, just to stand in your driveway and just see the people walking up and down the road, see kids and parents on bicycles. You know, for a long time, we've been known as the back porch people, but now all of a sudden we're regaining our front porches and we're spending time out on the front porch instead of the back porch. If there's no other word you take home today, the key word for today is gratitude and being grateful. You know, Roy Bennett said it best in Light of the Heart. He said, being grateful doesn't mean that everything is necessarily good. It just means that you can accept it as a gift. Gratitude allows us to recognize the good in our lives. Focusing on and appreciating the good in our lives constantly reminds us of all the great things around us. Gratitude allows us to see that the sources of good are usually close by. Practicing gratitude allows us to recognize those who bring goodness into our lives and humble us in order to give credit to that which we're grateful for. Believe it or not, there's a science to the practice of gratitude and its benefit. In a University of California study, they found that grateful teens had a higher grade point average, life satisfaction, social integration, and a lower envy and depression in comparison to mere materialistic kids and teens. Our ability to show our kids now, regardless of their age, what we can be grateful for is huge. Teaching them how to be humble is a life lesson that they can use for the rest of their life. A good practice to start with your kids is a gratitude journal. My wife, she started clipping pictures early in the kids' lives, almost from the time of birth. And my kids so in love moments where they could climb up in the recliner and hear stories of what different pictures meant. And they even go back to those pictures now with their girlfriends and others and say, hey, remember this time? This was pretty cool. So there's times where we can have a journal, whether it be on the computer, whether it be in a book, and it helps us to go back with our kids and say, you know, this is a really tough time that we're going through now. Let's go back to this time in our journal and see where everything turned out all right. You know, practicing gratitude and being grateful are keys to a happier life and a more satisfying life. We're very fortunate to have Dr. Johnson with us today. She's from right here in South Carolina at MUSC. Dr. Johnson, we're so glad to have you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, George. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm a clinical psychologist at the Medical University of South Carolina. As he said, I work at the National Crime Victims Center. I'm an associate professor there. And I do a lot of work on promoting child mental health in times of disparity and during difficult times and trauma times. And then also prevention of negative outcomes in kids. So I serve as one of the mental health consultants for Charleston County Head Start. So I work with a lot of young kids starting it with early Head Start, so age 2 up through age 5, kind of prepping them and trying to improve behavioral health and improve mental health from a young age. And then I also work a lot with parents. So a big piece of mine is I focus a lot on parenting stress and the impact that parenting stress can have, both on just regular developing youth, and as youth meaning very young all the way through the teenage years, and then also how that stress can really impact, and how it can impact differently based on different traumas and different experiences that people have. So right now, during the pandemic and during the quarantine, a lot of this stress comes up a lot, and parents are handling a lot, dealing with a lot. So I think it's very relevant right now, whether we consider this a traumatic experience or not. I think it probably differs based on different people and different people's experiences, but there's no doubt that everyone with young children in their lives, whether you're parents yourselves, whether you're a provider, or you're just a teacher, just interacting with kids in any way, that kids are being very impacted by this, by both their own emotions, but then also through emotions that parents are feeling and through the stressors that parents are experiencing.
And what you brought up is big. We used two words in our presentation. We used age appropriate. And can you sort of break that down for us when it talks about us as parents wanting to talk to our kids about the COVID-19 pandemic, and all the way from young children through their teens and older?
Yeah, that's really important, George. And as you said a little bit earlier, it's really, really important to talk with our kids about what's going on. Whenever scary things happen or whenever stressful things happen, a lot of times it's a parent or a teacher's first reaction is to keep this from the kids and don't tell the kids, because we don't want to alarm them. But the problem is, kids know a lot more than we think that they know. So they are picking up on the fact that things are different, especially during this time. Things are logistically different. They're not going to school. Parents aren't going to work. But also just our mannerisms are different, and kids know us better than we know ourselves. So if we're feeling anxious or we're feeling unsettled or like we don't have a lot of control over what's happening, our kids are picking up on that. And something that's really important is if we don't give the children the information and fill in the blanks, they're going to fill in the blanks themselves. And a lot of times, or most times, kids will fill in the blank with something much worse than what's actually happened. So when you think of an example, parent doesn't come home for an insecure child, maybe they're late from work or something, child usually fills in, mommy's never coming home, daddy got in a car accident. They fill in something worse, whereas maybe it's just that there was a train that stopped them on the way home. So we want to fill in that appropriate information. And George, when you say age appropriate, that really does differ. So what we're going to explain to a preschooler is very different than what we're going to explain to a teenager. So the three things we really want to make sure we're getting across is, number one, what is COVID? So what is the disease or the illness? Number two, how do we prevent it and what can we do? And number three, who does it impact more? So on that first point, what is it for a young child? So for a preschooler or even an early elementary child, it's okay to just say it's an illness. It makes people sick. I mean, kids, even as young as 2-3 years old, know what that means because they've gotten sick before. So they know what sick means. Then for an older, say a teenager, we can go into a little bit more detail and explain like how it's spread and what the symptoms are. And then second, how do we prevent it? So for a very young child, a preschooler, just saying wash our hands. So wash our hands and try to avoid places where there's lots of people. For an older child, we can explain exactly what that means. Wash your hands, 6 feet, physical distancing, all of that. And then the third piece around is very, very important. And a lot of times parents or providers will miss this piece about who it impacts more. The reason it's so important to explain to that is especially for young kids. So very young kids are wondering why they can't see their teachers, why they can't see their grandparents, why they, all of the people that they're used to being around, or people who are medically volatile or who have less immunity. So explaining to them for an age appropriate for a preschooler would just be that if adults or grandparents get sick, it can make them really sick. Like they could have to go to the hospital, and we don't want that. So that helps to put into perspective, or to say you're not going to school right now, or you're not going to preschool right now because other kids can get sick and we don't want their grandparents to get sick. So that really puts that into perspective.
You know, one of the things that none of us that are on this forum today, none of us like to be blindsided. And as you said, we need to be upfront and truthful with our kids, because imagine them being blindsided by their friends when we told them one thing that may be not the truth or exaggerated, and they hear something else from somebody that can lead to some trust problems.
Mm-hmm.
We
Definitely.
you know, I made the humor about being a turtle and sort of going into turtle mode sometimes. What does it look like when we talk about an introverted versus an extroverted child?
So kids are very different. So any of us who work with kids, I mean, I have 2 preschoolers and they're extremely different, even though they have a lot of similarities. So a big thing is some kids are very introverted and some kids are very extroverted, and others are kind of right in the middle. So a big thing to think about when kids are around stress or when kids are feeling anxious is the way they typically show it tends to often be an exaggeration of the behaviors that are typical for them. So for an extroverted kid, someone who maybe struggles with disruptive behavior a little bit more, or is just more vocal and more emotional about things, they will most likely exaggerate that behavior. So they will tend to have more temper tantrums, maybe have more consequences or need more consequences, maybe more difficult to control. Whereas a child who's introverted may go in and go into turtle mode, like you said, even more so. So a child who's typically very introverted may go to their room and want to be alone a lot more. They may want to sleep with you more. They may just kind of close up. So I think it's important to pay attention to both. The extroverted kids is more noticeable. So we notice much more, obviously, when a child's having a temper tantrum and is much difficult to handle. I think with those kids, what's important to remember is for young children, I mean, even for adults, but especially for young children, a lot of emotions feel the same. So anger feels very similar to anxiety, and feels similar to fear, and feels similar to sadness, especially for a young child. So remembering that if a child is having a lot more temper tantrums or is having a lot more emotions, it may be anxiety mixed up in that and not just acting out. So it's very important to think about that and talk to the child about that. So pull them aside and really open up the conversation. Now for an introverted child, same thing. So a child who tends to, that's what we have to look out for even more though, because that's more difficult to notice. It's not as jarring and not as, doesn't interrupt our daily lives as much. So if we see our child going into turtle mode or really just starting to close up, open a conversation with them. So I think it's really good with young kids to open it up by telling kids how we're feeling. So George said that at the very beginning, which I think is spot on and perfect, in that kids, it's okay to show our kids emotions and show our kids how we're feeling. And because number one, then they learn that it's okay to talk about emotions. But number two, they learn an appropriate way to express emotions, that it's okay to say you're mad or you're sad. So one activity that we've recommended a lot for young kids or for parents and teachers of young kids is to, at the end of each day, whether it's at the dinner table or at dinner time, say what's something good that happened today and what's something sad or bad that happened today. And as parents, we share as well. So like with my child, I may say, I'm sad that I have to miss this birthday party I really want to go to this weekend. Or I'm mad that I can't go on our family vacation that we planned this summer. So telling them that and letting them see that, and then having them open up to you as well. And that will help for those introverted and extroverted kids to be able to show them how to effectively share their emotions.
We've had people that that wording when our kids first came around and we had the well checkup. That was a big shocker for me. What's a well checkup? And there's signs and symptoms that we may see in our kids regarding anxiety and depression. And we need to remember that there are times that we can reach out to people like our pediatricians for help whenever we maybe have a red flag or see something that may not be particularly, quote, normal or with our kids. Do you have a good guide for when we should reach?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to monitor the behavior yourself. So knowing that and being aware that some changes are definitely going to happen during this time. So kids may act in different behaviors. They may act more clingy. They may sleep longer. They may regress. So some kids who were fully potty trained for weeks or months before this actually happened to my 3-year-old, will tend to have more accidents or may wet the bed more. And a lot of that is just from the anxiety and just from change in routine and all of that. So I think monitoring it first and being aware that every little change isn't something to be anxious about. But if that change continues and if it seems to be impacting the child, it doesn't hurt at all to reach out to your pediatrician. Also, you can use other resources. So reach out to friends or other supports in your life and talk about those things and see if other parents are experiencing the same things. So like for me with the regression and potty training, I asked a couple of friends and they were experiencing the same thing. So then I continued to monitor it. So if you do notice a pattern and you do become anxious about it, it is better to reach out to your pediatrician. Pediatricians don't mind getting calls, I'm sure. Not to speak for all pediatricians, but that they like helping. So reach out, because it's much better to reach out and have your pediatrician say that it's not an issue, don't worry about it, than for your anxiety to build up and to continue worrying, because then the kids are going to receive even more of that anxiety. Plus your pediatrician knows your child, and all kids are very different. So being able to talk to a trusted person that knows your child and knows your family, they can give some individual guidance as opposed to saying like one blanket statement across all kids, because kids are really different.
They are. And I want to go back to one thing you mentioned, there's a lot of folks that are in the public safety venue that are on this forum, and we use the word debriefing a lot for after an event or after an exercise, we'll have a debrief. And what you said earlier is huge, that we can take some time out at the end of the day and just talk with our kids about the day. Because later on that'll help them better understand that meeting in the locker room after a football game or a baseball game or a track meet. What are some other coping mechanisms that we can incorporate with our kids?
I think I love the term debriefing, and I love thinking about that. And I think you can do that with even really young kids. One coping, and this is kind of setting up for success, so it's almost like pre-coping mechanism that people can do that I've heard has been really effective, has been in the morning. So the thing with the pandemic, and I'm sure everyone on this call is probably feeling very similar, is each day in and of itself is a feat. So like, let's get through this day and then I'll think about tomorrow. So really taking each day as an independent event. And at the beginning of the day, maybe during breakfast, something that everyone usually does in the morning, set one goal for the day. So, and have your kids be a part of that goal. So say our goal for today may be no timeouts, or our goal for today may be to be kind to each other. And set a goal for the day. My goal for today is mommy has 6 work meetings and I really need some help in trying to get through these. So can we come up with some quiet activities to do? Then at the end of the day, do that debrief. So at the end of the day, when you do like what we've done in our family, and what a lot of families I've heard has worked really well. Some people call it roses and thorns. We just call it best and worst, but doing the best and worst of the day. and then saying, how do we do on our goal? So talking about that, and then the day is over. We go to bed, and the next morning we start completely fresh. So we start with a new goal. So that really helps, I think, to set the stage for the day, and helps that overwhelming feeling of just each week, each day, each week, each month tends to kind of run together and go on and on. I think also in coping is just really trying to take some time. So we're all as a family not used to being together 24 hours a day. So kids have school, parents have work, we have outside activities, we have birthday parties, we have all of that usually. But right now we're together 24 hours a day. Most families are. And really thinking about the fact that we have family coping things we can do together. So we need to come up with maybe one activity to do together today. Let's take a walk. Let's play a puzzle, something like that. But then also self activities. So if kids want to go to their separate bedrooms and do an activity on their own, and I sit out back in our back porch and just have a cup of coffee, that is really helpful. So that can allow us that time. I mean, right now we don't have that alone time. We don't have our drive home from work to help us kind of separate the two. Kids don't have that school time where they're away from us. So I think a huge coping thing is to recognize that we all need our time and to allow that.
You brought up a really big point. One of the things that I was taught by a dear friend was on my drive home, finding a billboard on the way home so that when I get to that point in the road that I shut the world off, and so that when I get home, my attention can be on my family. But now with that, we don't have that break point when we're able to transition and being at home. And we do see our kids being online a lot. They're doing their schoolwork online. They're getting their instruction online, and then they're playing games. A lot of us are probably struggling with what's too much time. What is too much screen time? What do you think about that?
It's a really hard question during the quarantine. So I think when we're not at home and when everything isn't remote, we typically think about lengths of time. So, each family has their own limits. So one family may say half an hour of screen time a day, 2 hours of screen time a day. And we really base it on time, which I think is really hard right now because everything, screen time is the only social interaction for some families. So like my daughters have ballet online and karate online and things where the screen is in front of them. So I think number one, lowering expectations. So not expecting, your typical 1 hour a day is probably not going to happen right now. So lowering our own expectations and giving ourselves a little bit of grace and a little bit of wiggle room and not sticking to those structures and routines that we usually do. We need a structure and routine, but it's going to be a different structure and routine. And thinking about, instead of a length of time, thinking about what it is that is on that screen. So for instance, if it's an interaction, so during ballet, during classroom, during a Zoom call with family members, that's in place of that social interaction that they're not getting. So if that is the interaction and that's the purpose of that, then that's okay. And have that be there. But if it's just idle screen time where they're staring at the screen and not really doing anything active, then that's when it starts to become a concern. So a couple things that you can do around that is take off anything extra on your kids' TV, tablets, things like that. So kids YouTube, things like that. I mean, obviously inappropriate things probably should be off anyways, but even kids YouTube, where typically it's okay if your child, watches 30 minutes of, I don't know, Peppa Pig on there per day. But for right now, when they're getting already 4 hours of other screen time, kids YouTube might not be the best option. So taking those things off. And then also really trying to interact with them when they're on the screen. So if they're doing class, talk with them afterwards with it. If they're on a family Zoom call, sit right next to them, because that's utilizing that screen and that time as kind of as that interaction and using that. So I think the biggest kind of take home is, instead of constraining yourself to hours or a length of time, instead think about what it is that's on the screen, because there are a lot of really cool things right now. I mean, my husband did with my child like a story from space, where it was like an astronaut like reading a story to kids this morning. And that was, I mean, that's so cool. We never thought about doing that before. So, but sitting next to the child and interacting while they're doing that. And that kind of takes the place of a story time they're getting at school or a story time they're getting at the library. So really thinking about the content of what's on that screen.
Eva, I see from the chat, somebody brought up putting positive quotes in places around the house. That's really become a neat thing. These quotes are available at craft stores and that, where people can, I could never pen something on the wall. My wife would, that would just freak my wife out. But Eva, what are some other comments that people have?
There's one question for Dr. Moreland that I shared with her already. It said, can Dr. Johnson share some information about MSU-USC and their free telehealth services during COVID? And are these telehealth services available to children and youth?
Yes, so I will share some of that information. And I think Eva just said that she'll offer it on the website. So we do have a clinic through MUSC right now called the Resiliency Clinic. I know that it's available for adults. I don't know the limitations of kids. So I want to find out 100% of what those parameters are before I share it. So I'll find that out right when we get off this call and share that. Also, we can share my email address if anyone wants to reach out individually. And then also, I know that we're talking to people throughout the state, so this is only for a small group of people. But for families that are involved in Charleston County Head Start, our mental health consultation service has set up some really unique ways that we can reach out to families. And families can contact us because we're not doing our typical services in the classroom. So for families that do fall into that small category, we do have a lot of free services and free kind of consultation for parents and kids.
That's really big. As we close out, Dr. Johnson, I on behalf of SC Thrive, we can't thank you enough for being with us, and we look forward to getting together again. During the presentation, we've shown you some great links. These links will be available on our website. Also, our contact phone number will come up here in just a moment. And parents, you can reach out to us at the contact center and call us, because there are some resources that we have that Dr. Johnson and others have spoken about that we can try and fit into your routine, or maybe help you out with things that you're going through right now. We want to really thank our sponsors who make SC Thrive possible. And we really, again, thank everybody for joining us on this forum. And we hope that you'll come and see us again each second and fourth Thursday of every month at 11:30. Dr. Johnson, thank you again so much.
Thank you so much. And everyone hang in there.
All right. Thank you all.